Well, my steering wheel waggles about all over the place. This is the power steering model, so it can't be good for something. Take the nut out of the middle of the steering wheel. It's an 1.25 AF nut, and there is no doubt in my mind at all that the best way to get these kind of nuts off is with an impact wrench. It doesn't matter whether you use an air one or a battery one. And it comes straight off. And then in there are two little threaded holes to take a puller. Well, I've just run a tap down them and they seem to be 1/4 inch UNC. Now, not really interchangeable according to armchair engineers, but 1/4 inch Whitworth is such a similar thread that if you happen to have 1/4 inch Whitworth bolts, you can use those instead. So I'm going to put a little bit of easing oil on there and make a puller. Just measured the hole centres and they seem to be about 1.25 inches apart. Well, I've had a go at it, and each time it has stripped the threads out of the metal in the steering wheel. Can't use any heat because there's plastic involved. So I think the next trick is to tap these out to the next size up, 5/16. Well, here is my puller. I have re-tapped those holes in the steering wheel to 5/16. You wouldn't be able to go much bigger because you'd be into the splines. I don't have a whole lot of faith in this because you don't actually get that much power from a screw thread. If I knew what was beneath it, I would probably put the slide hammer on there and just try and use a bit of force. However, I'm going to try it. I'm going to try it with the impact wrench on there. That little bit of vibration seems to help sometimes. Here goes. Well, that didn't go according to plan. Just gave it a little pull and the whole thing came up. And just there is the remains of a ball race, which presumably is what holds it into the system. There is a snap ring or a circlip kind of a thing there which holds the ball race down. So at least now I can press that shaft out of the steering wheel. Then we can measure the ball race and order a new one. Well, I'm glad I didn't turn the tractor over and keep a firm hold of the steering wheel. Well, I've got this off now and it was jolly tight. Pressed it out in the hydraulic press. There's a spline and a taper going on there. So now I'm going to clean it up, wire brush it, and see how that bearing is fixed on. I imagine it'll be circlips. So the outer part of the race is held in with this rather peculiar but special circlip or snap ring, which you can get out with a screwdriver. It's got locating lugs on it. What we're looking at now is the old bearing. It's got a 7/8 ID inner and an outer which measures 1 inch 406, which is about 1 inch and 13/32, which certainly isn't a standard size for a bearing. So I imagine that it was probably 1.5 inches bearing that was ground down as a special. I really don't know. Anyway, it doesn't matter because they're not available. I'm not even going to try going to the case dealers to see if they've got one, because if they did have it, it would be an arm and a leg. Anyway, I had a look through my bearing catalogue, just one catalogue from one manufacturer. There's no standard bearing anything like it, or there wasn't. Having said that, my catalogue's probably 30 years old. But what I've found online are these. Now, these are from the cycle industry for BMX bikes. I think that's got to do something with mountain bikes. So I bought a couple of them because they're not too far out. Now, I'm not a fan of bicycles. I think the more bikes we can get off the country roads, the better off we are. You're driving along in a great big tractor with something great big behind you, and all of a sudden you'll come up to a bicycle which thinks it's got the right of way and starts shouting at you. Well, I don't know. Anyway, these bearings are 22mm by 37mm by 9mm, which is just about fine for my purposes. So I've ground the shaft down on my lathe to 22mm, which is only a few thou off. You would be able to do it with a piece of emery cloth, actually, if you had enough time. Anyway, you could take it down. I've also put 4 circlip slots in it because I'm going to put 2 bearings on. Now, you could take that 37mm bearing down and you would probably be able to take enough off it to make it fit inside the steering column. And you could probably even do it twice and have 2 of them in, and then you would have to cut the steering column, pop the things in and weld it back together. But I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do something more fancy altogether. The identification marks on these bearings are 6904 2RS and ABSB 22 2RS. So that might just help you along. This drawing is as existing. A piece of thin walled tube supports the bearing. The tube has a bulge in it to stop the bearing going any further down, and a circlip at the top to stop it coming any further up. There's a heavy duty spline at the bottom of the steering shaft which engages in a female spline on the steering box. Over the years this spline will have worn, which means as soon as the slightest bit of wear is in this bearing, the shaft can waggle about. So I propose to cut the shaft off where that blue line is and replace it with this piece of thicker walled tube which has been bored out to accommodate 2 bearings, and that should hold the thing far more securely. This is my new improved steering shaft with its 2 bearings. The only piece of tube that I can find that suits the next part of my little project, which is the outer part of the steering column, is this, and it's part of an old top link, category 1 top link. It measures about 1 inch and 11/16. That is around about 42.5 millimeters outside diameter, and the inside diameter is 34 and a bit. That is around about 1 inch and 3/8 ish. Well, I've just been making a new top for my steering column, and I do realise that not everybody has a lathe or the time to do these things, but I thought it might be interesting for people to see what I'm doing. So the steering shaft goes in there, and it's a bit wider than the original, thicker walls, so that I can use an ordinary standard circlip to hold this lot in, so that I can get it out more easily should I have to. Because it's got thicker walls than the original, I've reduced the diameter at the back so that when I weld it on, I'm welding 2 similarly sized materials together. So I'm just going to now turn a little step in it to locate it to the original, to keep everything concentric. So there we are, that's the 2 pieces as they will go on the tractor. There we are, the 2 pieces, the old and the new. Can't be bothered to put the tractor in the lathe to cut this thing off. So I'm going to do it with a hacksaw. mark it out carefully first to keep everything nice and square. So I've marked that out with a pair of odd legs from above, of course. And now probably the most difficult part of this job is going to be cutting that off nice and square. There we are, in situ. So if I now measure from there to the dash, to a fixed point on the dash, and then from there to the same fixed point on the dash, I should be able to work out how a little bit more needs taking off this rough edge so that the cog is in the horse spline, or whatever you want to call it, is set into full depth. I have protected the dashboard with some bits of tin here, and I'm going to tack the two parts of the steering column together, the new and the old. I'm going to try to do it with my new toy, which is a TIG welder, and I'm not going to show you my attempt because I haven't been TIG welding for 30 years. And when I tack it, I'm going to do it with the steering shaft in place, just to make sure everything is held and straight and as it should be. Then I'm going to whip the shaft out and finish the weld. The reason I'm doing it with the TIG is because there is less heat than with the gas. I'm quite confident with the gas, but I don't want to melt the rubber seals or the grease that's on those new bearings. So just 3 little tacks and the job will be done. Well, I'm quite pleased with myself. That is the first time I've actually used my TIG. I had a little practice on a piece of scrap a few weeks ago, but it's the first time I've used it for a job, and I haven't made a fool of myself. I'll pretty it all up with the gas later on though. Right, I'm just doing the final assembly. I'm putting the circlip in. I'm going to use it for a week before I finish the welding, make sure everything is just as I like it. And when I do the final assembly, I'm going to put a load of grease in there. Not for lubrication, but to protect it, so that when the next chap takes it apart, he will be able to do it without destroying anything. Now my final modification is going to be to glue this piece of 2-inch exhaust pipe to the underside of the steering wheel with a bit of silicone sealant or construction adhesive or whatever I can find, and it will come down to there underneath the steering wheel, and it will keep as much muck and grime out as possible. And I think that that will be a very, very worthwhile modification. Anyway, I'll finish the video now and I'm going to go and play with the tractor.